Mega Manila and streaming on the World Wide Web. We are Crusaders Broadcasting System, DWAD. 1098 AM. Now Radio. Ang susunod na programa ay maaaring maglaman ng mga pananaw at opinyon na hindi kinakailangang sumasalamin ng mga pananaw ng CBS. Up next on DWAD, Sulo ng Pilipino.
Sa kadakilaan, mayang perlas ng silangan, may gintuang kasaysayan, lahing pinagpala ng may kapal. Bayang sinil, ikaw ay tumindig, kalayaning paglaban at idiin, harapin ang mga manlulupig, nasa'yo ay sumaklot, laman mo'y tinabig. Ang inang diwang mapagdimagsik, sa dugo at ugat magpapainit, aserong muklo ang nakakawangis, papawi sa lumbay at mga hilagpis. Babalikwas ka sa pagkakahamak, naglaylay-isip ang sadyang busina, tanglaw sa landas na iyong pinatahak, Pilipinis mo'y gabay sa pangarap. Sulong sa kadakilaan, ito ang panawagan, ang bilang isang Pilipino, kaisipang talisay at panahon. Pilipinismo, Pilipinismo, gabay tungo sa kadakilaan. Sa kadakilaan, mayang perlas ng silangan, may gintuang kasaysayan, lahing pinagpala ng may kapal. Bayang sinil, ikaw ay tumindig, kalayanin paglaban at idiin, harapin ang mga manlulupig, nasa'yo ay sumaklot, laman mo'y tinabig. Ang inang diwang mapagdimagsik, sa dugo at ugat magpapainit, aserong muklo ang nakakawangis, papawi sa lumbay at mga hilagpis. Babalikwas ka sa pagkakahamak, naglaylay-isip ang sadyang busina, tanglaw sa landas na iyong pinatahak, Pilipinis mo'y gabay sa pangarap. Sulong sa kadakilaan, ito ang panawagan, ang bilang isang Pilipino, kaisipang talisay at panahon.
I truly felt my breath catching at the moment the ceasefire was announced.
People across the Middle East rejoice after Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire and prisoner swap deal starting on Sunday. That's as the IDF keeps hitting Gaza with more deadly airstrikes. Palestinian children celebrate the prospects of peace. Many thousands of the youngest and most vulnerable Gazans killed by Israeli bombs will never see it happen. While Israel has yet to implement the sea deal, some citizens there are less optimistic as they've been waiting for over a year for hostages to be released from Gaza.
A lot of people died from there. Also, our hostages, our soldiers, and Palestinian people in Gaza. And for what?
Should have been done so long time ago, more than a year ago. And then we could have saved so many lives, so many hostages that could have come alive. We got them dead.
The problem that Ukraine is facing is not that they're running out of money, it's that they're running out of Ukrainians. There's a size differential here that's important.
Incoming President Trump's nominee for Secretary of State points out Kiev's manpower issue amid Washington's mounting calls for Ukraine to lower the conscription age and send teenagers to the front lines. Very good morning to you. This is RT International with the latest world news update. It's great to have you with us, as always. Our top story, the Arab world is celebrating the long-awaited ceasefire deal that Israel and Hamas have finally agreed to. After 15 months of war, the truce is set to take effect on Sunday. Overjoyed locals are cheering across the region in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon and Jordan. People say it's hard to believe that peace is finally coming to the Palestinians who've suffered horrific losses. Here's what some of the Arab populations have been saying after they heard about the deal.
All citizens feel relieved and happy with the news of the ceasefire, and we hope to return to our homes, villages and cities as soon as possible.
We have been waiting for this happiness for a year and a half. No one can feel the feeling that we are experiencing now. An indescribable feeling. I want to return to Gaza City, to my home.
This victory is a great victory for our Palestinian brothers. We are experiencing the joy that will prevail in Gaza, the victory of Gaza, and the resistance through the Israeli withdrawal, the ceasefire, and the release of prisoners. Our people are living this joy as if they were living in Gaza.
We have been waiting for this moment for a long time, and my feelings are indescribable. The people in Jordan are following the ceasefire very closely, and I salute them with all my heart. I ask God to have mercy on the martyrs, and we congratulate our people in Gaza.
I truly felt my breath catching at the moment the ceasefire was announced. Citizens took to the streets and began firing into the air in the city of Khan Yunis. Screens were set up on the streets and people watched the press conference about the ceasefire from Doha, celebrating with joy and waving Palestinian flags. This city, the largest in Gaza, is home to over 1,700,000 displaced persons who have repeatedly experienced loss and disaster. It is time for these people to return home, even if their homes are just ruins in the northern areas. Efforts are also underway to provide humanitarian aid, including the swift delivery of tents and medical supplies. The region has been suffering for 15 months due to the Israeli conflict, which has led to the deaths of Palestinians and their starvation. The Israeli army continues to carry out extensive airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, starting from the northern provinces and moving to the southern regions, particularly in the city of Rafah. Military aircraft are currently attacking the home of the Al-Nabi family in Al-Shuhada Square. Earlier, another attack occurred in the Al-Mawasi area, resulting in 5 fatalities. The situation remains tense in the eastern part of Khan Yunis. Local residents are seriously concerned about the intensity of fire from the Israeli military. However, people are filled with optimism and look forward to next Sunday when the ceasefire will take effect, allowing the displaced individuals to return to their homes in the northern provinces.
There's plenty of genuine joy among the youngest generation of Palestinians in war-torn Gaza. But while the survivors celebrate, distressing images show the bodies of several children who were killed in the hours after the ceasefire deal was made. Some 18,000 miners have reportedly been left dead since October 2023. Many more were wounded, orphaned and traumatized for life. According to Hamas, Israel has failed to achieve its goals in Gaza, and the militant group says its resistance will continue even after the ceasefire comes into force.
The Al-Aqsa flood operation on October 7th marked a significant turning point in the history of our cause and the stages of our people's great resistance. Its effects will continue and will not end with the conclusion of this war. The occupation has achieved nothing but destruction, devastation, and massacres against our people. It only secured its captives through an agreement with the resistance to stop the war and aggression, along with an honorable prisoner exchange deal.
Following Wednesday's comprehensive deal, the Israeli government has released a statement that casts doubt on the planned prisoner swap with Hamas.
Among other things, in contrast to an explicit clause that gives Israel the right to veto the release of mass murderers who are symbols of terror, Hamas is demanding to dictate the identities of these terrorists. The Prime Minister instructed the negotiating team to uphold the understandings that were agreed upon and to reject outright the last-minute attempts at blackmail by Hamas.
We're still waiting for official confirmation from the Israeli side to say with absolute certainty that the deal is finalized. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has acknowledged several unresolved points in the framework, but is hopeful that it will be worked out within hours. They said Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear there will be no official announcement from him until the deal is 100% sealed. On Wednesday evening, Qatar's Prime Minister, whose country, along with Egypt and the US, of course, mediated these talks, announced the exchange and ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, saying implementation will begin on Sunday. He expressed hope that both sides will stick to their commitments and assured that Qatar will work with its partners to make sure the agreement will last.
The implementation of the agreement will commence on Sunday, January 19th. The first phase, lasting 42 days, will include a ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli forces to the east.
You heard the Prime Minister outline the first phase, lasting 42 days, while after that comes the second stage, another 42 days, when the remaining hostages will be brought home in exchange for a yet-to-be-negotiated number of Palestinian prisoners. At the moment, as you remember, 98 captives are being held in Gaza, with at least 34 confirmed dead by the army. That leaves 64 hostages potentially alive, waiting to be rescued. As for the Palestinian prisoners, officials say currently more than 10,000 people are held in Israeli jails, including women and minors. How many will be eventually freed? Yet unclear. And during this second phase, we also hear that the Israeli troops will completely leave the Gaza Strip. The final stage will turn to Gaza's reconstruction and what's being called the day after. The Israeli president addressed to the nation earlier on Wednesday, expressing optimism for a quick approval. Once Israel signs off, the rest will mostly be a formality, of course. The deal will need approval from the cabinet and government. And if everything goes as planned, Sunday could mark the release of the first hostages from Gaza, the freeing of Palestinian prisoners, and a pause in the fighting. Well, even though we hear from Israeli Prime Minister's office that it is due to Netanyahu's firm stance and efforts that Hamas agreed to the terms of the deal finally, Israeli sources say that the involvement of the incoming U.S. administration, led by Trump's active and some say aggressive Middle East envoy, revived hostage talks with Hamas, and he was the one who put significant and crucial pressure on Netanyahu to secure the deal. Here's a twist. Before the mediators could even announce it, President-elect Donald Trump broke the news himself, posting about the deal on social media.
This epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies.
Biden, whose administration was unable to strike this deal for months, praised American involvement.
After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration.
Well, despite a rather vague answer by the Qatari Prime Minister that you have heard earlier, it was quite clear that all sides involved in the talks, including representatives from both current and incoming American administration, raced to strike the deal before January 20. Why? That is after Trump warned that if there was no deal before his inauguration, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Do you think they're waiting for President Trump to take office?
No, I think they heard him loud and clear. Better get done by the inaugural.
If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. If the deal isn't done before I take office, which is now going to be 2 weeks, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
So many positive words, but I have to say that not everyone in Israel supports this deal.
I think it's a complicated feeling right now. From one hand, I'm happy that we've got a hostage deal coming through, but I'll be happy. I'll be happy whenever I'm going to see the last hostage crossing the border to Israel. Till then, I can't breathe, really.
A lot of people died from there. Also, our hostages, our soldiers, and Palestinian people in Gaza. And for what? I mean, they could be here with us now.
Should have been done so long time ago, more than a year ago, and then we could have saved so many lives, so many hostages that could have come alive. We got them dead. So.
Earlier, we also heard some harsh criticism from members of Netanyahu's coalition, specifically the National Security Minister and Finance Minister, both settlers with strong anti-Palestinian and extreme right views, calling for the war to continue. Ben-Gvir even threatened to leave the coalition if the deal goes through. However, I have to say that this will not jeopardize the deal or the government. Opposition parties have already assured before they would step in to support the coalition if necessary. They were among the first to welcome the deal after the news came in. Meanwhile, preparations are in high gear. The IDF has launched the Wings of Freedom operation to facilitate the hostages' return, while hospitals across Israel are setting up special wards and preparing their staff, again, to embrace the hostages. Israeli Foreign Minister has cut short his European trip to return home because of the deal, of course, and the Israeli president has met with the head of the International Red Cross to coordinate efforts for the deal. On the Palestinian side, some prisoners have already been told to pack their belongings while their families in the West Bank are waiting for the return of their loved ones. And celebrations, of course, have erupted in Gaza. For many, it's a moment they've been waiting for through 15 long months of war. Well, the next 48 hours will be crucial, with hope and tension running high on both sides. If all goes as planned, this fragile agreement could mark the beginning of a pause in the bloodshed and perhaps the first step towards something more lasting.
According to Gazan officials, the ongoing war has already left more than 46,000 Palestinians killed, including up to 18,000 children. Over 110,000 people have also been wounded in the Israeli assault. The fighting has displaced 1.9 million Gazans, nearly the entire population of the enclave, who now live in makeshift camps in dire conditions. Let's bring in a guest. We're joined by journalist Sana Kamal, joining us from Cairo. Many thanks for coming on the program. It's good to see you. So there's been a lot of optimism and hype over Wednesday's deal, but even since that deal was signed, the IDF has killed more people in Gaza, while the Israeli government now appears to be backtracking on the planned prisoner swap with Hamas. So what is your reaction?
Actually, in Gaza, the Palestinian people have mixed reactions and mixed feelings towards both the ceasefire that announced by Hamas and Israel in Gaza. But while the Israeli army is still continuing its attacks against the Palestinians in Gaza overnight until now, more than 40 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli ongoing attacks, which make and put all the Palestinians in the coastal enclave under the pressure, because they know that 3 days that's separating between them and between the true ceasefire in Gaza Strip, which means that more and more of the Palestinians will be killed by the Israeli army. So we cannot say that a full joyful and happiness that spread in the coastal enclave and in Gaza, because on the other hand, we have many disasters that resulted by the Israeli war in Gaza. We have more than 46,000 of Palestinians who were killed by the Israeli army, and more than 10,000 of Palestinians who are still missing under the rubble. The situation in Gaza really is very complicated now, and no one can say and can share the world and the Arab countries of their happiness and joyful, because who really are suffering now are the Palestinians inside Gaza, even after the ceasefire declared by Hamas and Israel.
Well, the terms of the deal do state that the ceasefire doesn't come into effect until Sunday. So how do you see things playing out? Do you expect the IDF to just keep bombing Gaza relentlessly until Sunday? I mean, children have been killed even after the agreement was sealed. How many more Palestinians could die before they see peace?
Yeah, actually, as I've experienced all the Israeli wars in Gaza, in the latest moments and in the latest seconds also of before the ceasefire and the truce they make effect inside Gaza, the Israeli army used to kill more and more of Palestinians. So we are talking now about 3 days, which means that maybe we will lose more than 100 or 200 or even 300 of Palestinians who could be died and killed by the Israeli army. Only during less than 6 hours, the Israeli army killed more than 40 Palestinians. So when we talk about every second in Gaza without ceasefire, it means that every second will carry new victims and new deaths in Gaza. To be honest, the Palestinian people now are calling on the international community and the mediators to make pressure on Israel to stop at least their attacks against civilians and against the Palestinians. Can you imagine all the victims, the latest victims in Gaza, they were looking forward to witnessing the ceasefire. Even when they witnessed the ceasefire, they were killed also. So there is a new Israeli crimes against the innocent civilians who really suffered from the consequences of the war, suffered from the famine, the killing, the fears from everything inside Gaza, and they also were killed. So without getting effect of the ceasefire in Gaza, we will witness more and more of victims inside Gaza, including women, children, and even active humanitarian activists inside Gaza, like Ahmad Abu Rus, who was killed a few minutes before the ceasefire announced. I know Ahmad, and he was looking forward to witnessing the ceasefire and at least to return to his life. And unfortunately, the Israeli army killed him also.
When it comes to Israel's perspective on the situation, when it started out in October 2023, it had a number of set goals in this war. Have any of those goals actually been achieved?
The main goal that Israel achieved in Gaza is destroying the most of the Gaza Strip, killing more than 46,000 of Palestinians. Most of them were children and women. In addition, to destroying the life of the Gazans inside Gaza. Before the 7th October 2023, the Palestinians in Gaza, they live a normal life despite all the difficulties that they were suffering from the Israeli blockade. They were suffering from that deliberately and continually wars against them, but they were ready and they were dealing with their dire situation, and they established their own life inside Gaza. I'm a journalist from Gaza, and I'm very well know how we were dealing with our life inside Gaza. But after the war broke out between Hamas and between Israel, the only thing and the only goal that Israel achieved in Gaza, how it destroyed our lives, how it destroyed our future, and how it returned all of the Palestinians in Gaza, all of them, to the zero in their lives. Now we have nothing inside Gaza. We have nothing of hopes. We have nothing of everything. The only thing that we have now is at least to start from the zero once again, and to start to rebuild our Gaza far away, by the way, far away from the politicians and from the political issues. The only thing that the people are looking for now is returning their lives without involving in any more wars between the Palestinian factions and Israel.
Absolutely, we live in hope. Many thanks for speaking to us today, journalist Sana Kamal. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Well, Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State, Senator Marco Rubio, says Ukraine's main problem on the battlefield is a lack of manpower and not Western weapons, as Kiev claims.
I saw a quote recently, and I wish I could attribute to who it was, but the quote was, and I think it was very wise, where they said the problem that Ukraine is facing is not that they're running out of money, it's that they're running out of Ukrainians. There's a size differential here that's important.
The solution being offered by Washington is for Kiev to lower the mobilization age to 18. Both the outgoing and incoming U.S. administrations are pushing the same idea.
We have been crystal clear, including publicly, that manpower is an acute concern and is something that Ukraine will have to address, even as we do our part to get them the munitions that they need.
They have real manpower issues. Their draft age right now is 26 years old, not 18. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They could generate hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. So when we hear about morale problems, when we hear about issues on the front line, look, if the Ukrainians have asked the entire world to be all in for democracy, we need them to be all in for democracy.
And while Ukraine struggles to replenish its losses, Russia's defense ministry reports fresh gains on the Donbass battlefield. The settlement of Ukrainka in the Donetsk Republic has been taken by Moscow's forces, with Kiev losing more than 1,500 troops just over the past day. Meanwhile, Ukrainian veteran neo-Nazi officers are attempting to justify Kiev's drive to send more citizens to a war it's losing. The commander of a rebranded Azov battalion has detailed the disaster on the front while promoting more mobilization.
The situation is complete ass, just like everywhere else. A task is assigned to a brigade when it should be assigned to an entire division. As everyone knows, our senior commanders like to have us answer according to regulations. But they like to set tasks absolutely not according to regulations. Our brigade is told to defend 50 kilometers of front lines, while all those 50 kilometers are under attack. If you set inadequate tasks, then don't be surprised when you get inadequate results.
And as Washington pushes Kiev to send teenagers to fight, Vladimir Zelensky says he wants more money and weapons from the West before he can mobilize more men. One of his loyal journalists has told common Ukrainians to bear the brunt of the fighting.
Now we hear from people that the children of deputies should fight, and after that they will leave. No, my darlings, this is a democratic state. In a democratic state, the common man dies for the state. If we want the aristocracy to die for the state, then we must live in a feudal state, as things were before the French Revolution. The desire to be equal to someone must be paid for, including with one's own life.
Well, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have reportedly been killed or wounded in the war, while millions have fled the country. An opposition lawmaker has accused Kiev of implementing a notorious depopulation plan masterminded by a Cold War-era U.S. National Security Advisor.
Feeling the inevitable and imminent collapse, the regime of the puppet actor is trying to urgently complete what its allies signed it up for, to create conditions for reducing the population of Ukraine to 20 million people. According to Zbigniew Brzezinski's plan, this figure should be reached by 2030. Vladimir Zelensky is the one who is implementing a new version of the Nazi General Plan Ost on the territory of Ukraine, and it should be noted that he, with the help of the loyal Soros followers Kuchma and Pinchuk, is doing this quite well.
Ukraine will soon become the land that was populous, was rich, was industrialized, and was driven into the abyss. And no, not by the war. The war was just the final nail in the coffin.
When I was passing by, I saw Brzezinski sitting there. Our eyes crossed. I sat down next to him. We didn't talk too much, but I learned the main thing. He said that by 2030 there should be no more than 20 million people left in Ukraine. I laughed in his face and said, "Well, you're a fantasist. Where did you get that from? Why do you say that?" He said, "Because there's no way to feed more, and we don't need more."
Well, Washington's notorious ex-NSA's wildest fantasies are coming true, because it's now estimated that by 2030, Ukraine will be home to just 24 to 35 million people. That's an almost 50% decline from the day Zbig Brzezinski made his wish. Zelensky has transformed his nation into a barren wasteland. And it's not just the hundreds of thousands who now lie in cemeteries. 7 million live in poverty. Pensioners say they can barely afford the basics. Universities are being axed. The birth rate is one of the lowest in the world. Military-age men abroad have been cut off from consulates, unable to return home. There's no hope of paying off that $150 billion of debt. The lights are off, the industry is lost, and the infrastructure is gone. And then, of course, there's the fear. Is the government really building a dirty bomb? And when will it inevitably come for me?
Our view has been that there's not one weapon system that makes a difference in this battle. It's about manpower, and Ukraine needs to do more, in our view, to firm up its lines in terms of the number of forces it has on the front lines.
Ukraine has hard decisions to make about further mobilization, but these are necessary decisions. We have a commitment, though, for every person, every soldier that Ukraine mobilizes. We're committed to making sure that they have the training and the equipment they need to effectively defend the country.
We're absolutely going to keep sending Ukraine weapons and equipment. We know that's vital, but so too is manpower at this point. In fact, we believe manpower is the most vital need they have.
Well, Zelensky took the hint and dropped the mobilization age to 25. And now the number 18 is being debated. And for what? No, that's not right. For whom?
The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
I've never seen the United States of America in a more just war than what this one is.
We're trying to stop the Russians so we don't have to fight them. They're sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that could be good to our economy.
Let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war.
For a country thousands of kilometers and an ocean away. A country which has long eyed Ukraine as the perfect pawn in its grand political chess game.
Ukraine, a new and important space on the Eurasian chessboard, is a geopolitical pivot because its very existence as an independent country helps to transform Russia. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. However, if Moscow regains control over Ukraine, with its 52 million people and major resources, as well as its access to the Black Sea, Russia automatically again regains the wherewithal to become a powerful imperial state, spanning Europe and Asia.
Brzezinski spelled it out way back in the 90s. Ukraine is a means to an end, a way to ring the death knell for Russia, the largest nation on earth, truly sovereign, nuclear capable, and resource rich. But of course, Ukraine itself knows about resources. Coal, iron, gas, nickel, titanium, lithium, copper, lead, words that make the World Economic Forum and BlackRock drool. Did you know that back in 2021, the EU signed a strategic resource partnership with Kiev? And of the 30 natural resources it needed for its green energy transformation, 2/3, it deemed, would have to come from Ukraine. 2/3. Those are some high stakes. And sometimes you need to put morality aside to guarantee the winning hand, don't you? And the winning hand here really does look like a land of plenty, so conveniently empty.
But what did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe.
Zelensky has been Brzezinski's greatest pupil, ready to sell his soil, sell his soul, and send his citizens to certain death for his 15 minutes of fame and power, and to reign over a land that was. Always a pleasure to have you with us here on RT. Up next is documentary time, uncovering the links between NATO bombings and cancer rates in the former Yugoslavia. And we will, of course, be back with more news updates in just 30 minutes. See you then.
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. As he leaves office, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken will not be remembered as a diplomat. He will be remembered as a moral disgrace. When faced with the chance to stop wars and genocide, he refused. He talked about a rules-based order, but he acted as an international criminal. Cross-talking Blinken's legacy, I'm joined by my guest, Michael Rossi, in Tashkent. He is a lecturer of political science at Rutgers University. And here in Moscow, we have Alexander Aitin. He is a lecturer at Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. Okay, let's start out with Michael in Tashkent. As Anthony Blinken, in his exit interviews, and they were softball ones at that, with the New York Times and the Financial Times, he was singing his own praises, saying America is stronger, its enemies are weaker. He didn't talk about security, which is something remarkable about this administration. It never talked about anyone's security. He thinks he did a bang-up job, and he's very, very pleased with himself passing the baton to the next administration. How will history judge Anthony Blinken? Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I have absolutely no doubt that he thinks to himself that he did a bang-up job, and I have no doubt that the New York Times and the Financial Times will judge him as a defender of global liberal democracy. History is going to judge him at best as a very mediocre Secretary of State. As someone who is a little more than a cog in the wheel, a voice, a mouthpiece of the transatlantic liberal system, and one in which I have, as I said before, he has no doubt that he did a successful job, but his name will be connected to a rather unpopular presidency, one that has enabled genocide in the Palestinian territories, another that has been part of a war machine that has perpetuated war in Ukraine against Russia. And I'm sure that the critiques of his administration, of his leadership, will be something that he never really reads. But, you know, if the absolute best, if he's lucky, he'll be considered little more than a footnote.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the rest of us, I hope that justice will catch up with them at some point. We all know that that's unlikely today, but who knows in the future? Alexander, I'm glad that Michael brought up the genocide in the Palestinian territories, but there's also, he sings his praises about the proxy war against Russia, a war that was completely unnecessary and could have been easily avoided. And what's really remarkable, as Anthony Blinken is leaving office, people like Michael Waltz, that'll be the National Security Council advisor in the next administration, is talking about how to undo and end the catastrophe that the Biden administration perpetuated. But he seems completely unconcerned about that. Alexander.
We might ask who Blinken did a good job for, because he certainly did not do a good job for the United States. However, if we look at Israel, I think he did a great job for Israel, and that's probably who is very pleased with his work as well. Remember that at the beginning of the October war between Gaza, between Hamas and Israel, when that started off, Blinken moved his office to Tel Aviv and took up residence in Israel for, I don't remember how many weeks, but it's this is an unprecedented thing for the United States Secretary of State to move to a foreign nation as if he's coordinating efforts there or something. This is quite strange to have from someone who is supposed to represent the interests of the United States and not a foreign power, for example, Israel. We might have to take that into account. And with Mike Waltz, we should also be very careful of him, because in front of a domestic audience, in front of Americans, yes, he's going to say that he wants to undo the damage caused by Blinken, caused by the Biden administration, but we have to consider what he's now saying, which is that he's also supporting the Ukrainians reducing their minimum draft age to 18. So he's calling for the same sorts of things in Ukraine that the Biden administration is calling for right now. So Mike Waltz doesn't care how many Ukrainians are slaughtered in this war on the front lines. For him, it's all just part of the big political game and increasing the Trump administration's leverage in potential negotiations with Russia. So there's actually appears to be very little difference between this incoming Trump administration on the foreign policy front compared to the current Biden administration.
Well, both of you have rapidly moved into the second, well, what I'd hoped to be the second part of the program, but I'm going to go with the flow here. Michael, I mean, I agree. I mean, you have like Keith Kellogg, you know, he's supposed to be the point man for Ukraine, and he's talking about maximum pressure against Iran. I mean, I don't know what administration he's speaking for, the current one or the one that's going to come about. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I mean, as far as Iran is concerned, both the Trump and Biden administrations are in lockstep, right? Iran is public enemy number one when it comes to the Middle East. It's been long regarded as the greatest belligerent, the greatest rival to U.S. American interests. Netanyahu has long regarded Iran also as one of the biggest obstacles against what he regards as stability. Iran is the enabler of Hezbollah. It propped up the former Assad regime in Syria. So in this step, it's tempting to think that Trump is going to be somehow different from that of the Biden administration when it comes to Iran and the Middle East. The two of them are basically just continuing the same strategy that the United States has been employing within that region since, time immemorial. So, we like to think, many people like to think that Trump is going to be a breath of fresh air against the Biden administration in a new sense in American foreign policy. Maybe that would be for Ukraine. I don't know, right? Ukraine is one story. Trump seems to be eager to end that conflict, to simply redirect all efforts in the Middle East. But when it comes to that, there is very little change between Biden and Waltz, between Blinken and Waltz, and between Biden and Trump.
Well, Alexander, I mean, since Ukraine is being brought up here, I'm just befuddled on how the incoming administration, the individuals we have mentioned here, just continue the same talking points as if they're saying something different. I mean, we had Waltz, he goes on, the bloodshed must come to an end, I'm paraphrasing, of course, must come to an end. This trench warfare must come to an end. But in the same paragraph, they must lower the conscription age in Ukraine. I mean, what is he talking about? That's just more for the meat grinder. And I don't know how it's being seen in the United States, but these people are saying, well, it's the same conversation. Maybe it's two sides of the same coin, but it's the same message. Alexander.
Well, I would say that it's not being seen in the United States. The United States has one of the most rigorous and vicious censorship regimes in the entire world. And we have to understand that the American people, by and large, don't really understand what's going on because they're not being told. So, frankly, crosstalk is one of the only available, widely broadcasted places where you can get English language information that is accurate. Everything domestically produced in the United States, it's complete nonsense from either the left or the right. They're both just trying to manipulate their audiences in slightly different ways, but in ways which are always beneficial to the business elites in the United States. And what we're starting to see now is that the American, well, to some extent American, some of them are Americans, but the business elites in the United States hate the American people. There's no other way to describe it. And we look at what Elon Musk and other elements of the new Trump administration are pushing in terms of the H-1B work visa program, trying to bring in who knows how many millions of people from India. Well, we've already flooded the American labor market and destroyed low-skill labor in the United States through immigration from Latin America. So the United States doesn't really need more low-skill immigration, and there isn't a huge pool of labor to draw on for that in Latin America anymore anyway. Most of the people who wanted to get into the United States already have. But who has not gotten into the United States? It's people who could take on sort of tech roles and middle income, middle wage, middle class positions, particularly the sorts of jobs that the H-1B visa program would allow. So the business elites of the United States are going to now use the Trump administration in order to massively increase the number of low-wage workers coming in to displace American workers from the professional class.
This is America First policies. I'm being facetious, of course. That's one of the things we're going to find out. Michael, before we go to the break here, do you remember what Joe Biden said when he was inaugurated, what kind of foreign policy he wanted to have? You remember, I mean, this is not a trick question, but he said his administration will have a middle-class foreign policy. Do you remember that? What happened to that?
I have to confess, I don't remember that.
Well, I mean, we're going to quickly forget the Biden administration. Believe me, keep going.
I mean, the one thing I remember is, nothing fundamentally will change. That's that I remember. I mean, Biden was selected by the Democratic Party to be the gatekeeper of the current neoliberal system. And, to that extent, I think he's been highly successful in providing a platform for the professional managerial class to continue to exert leverage over that working class that he claims to still think that he comes from.
Well, I mean, Michael, the PMCs, I'm glad you brought it up here, because as we move forward, next week we will have the next president of the United States, the 47th. But it seems to me that they're trading one set of oligarchs and billionaires for another set, because I don't see I didn't see in the last 4 years a middle-class foreign policy, and I don't see a MAGA foreign policy because of the people that Trump has around him. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to interrupt myself. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Anthony Blinken's legacy. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Blinken's legacy. Okay, let's go back to Alexander. I mean, one of the things that is quite fascinating to watch, or maybe banal, depending on how you want to look at it, is that, you know, we had an election in November, in many ways kind of world historic. We've never seen this kind of political comeback, considering the establishment's lawfare against Trump, its control of the media, of Hollywood, of academia, et cetera, et cetera. And he still came out on top, almost like a Lazarus figure, and he won the popular vote, okay? And so I usually don't invoke on this program Barack Obama, but I will. Elections have consequences, or at least they should. And I think that, you know, what we've seen since the election to the point that we're talking right now is that, you know, the Trump team on spring break, they're having a wonderful time. They're, you know, their parents gave them credit cards and they're having a wonderful time. But it's going to get very, very sober next week. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, we have to consider who won the 2024 election, because we have to remember that the 2020 election was stolen. And a lot of people in the United States are living in a fairyland where they've just decided to forget that Trump won the 2020 election but was denied the office. Well, now in 24, somehow the Democrats managed to get 6 million fewer votes than in 2020. How did this happen? Well, we know that something on the order of 15 million fake votes were created in order to get Biden the presidency. And so this time the Democrats just didn't do that. So why? Well, the only logical explanation is that Trump made a deal with people who have the influence to prevent the Democratic Party machine from stealing another presidential election when they already control the executive office. So they had everything going for them, and they just decided to let it go.
Well, I mean, but Alexander, in all fairness, I'm not going to disagree with you, but in all fairness, Trump's victory was so overwhelming that it was really hard to deny, and we didn't have the conditions of COVID as well, which is an important caveat here. But I get your point here. Let me go back to Michael in Tashkent. Returning to Blinken in an important way here, one of the things that the Biden administration did with its foreign policy is it really turned the United States into a pariah on the world stage. Americans don't know this, they're not aware of this here. But the culpability of the Biden administration with the genocide is not going to go away ever. Go ahead in Tashkent, ever.
You know, I've been thinking about whether or not people like Biden and Blinken are directly complicit within this genocide. And I know that this is a very controversial word to use, but that's exactly what it is. I would say at absolute best, people like Blinken and Biden are directly complicit, because this is the actions and the decisions of the Israeli state and the Israeli government. But they're enablers. They're defenders at the international front. Economically speaking, they provide Israel with carte blanche support. Militarily, diplomatically, at the UN Security Council, Israel would not be able to do what it does without the complete support from the United States. And we need to be very clear that next week, when Trump takes over, this is not going to change.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not going to change. I very rarely go on Twitter, X, or whatever it's called these days, but I warned everyone that, you know, you can have a good feeling right now, but we could go from easily Genocide Joe to Genocide Don. And it's going to happen, because the world is not going to see it differently. Donald Trump is not some great hope to change the world. What people are hoping is that maybe he will start adjusting American foreign policy that would be in the interest of the American middle class, as I pointed out at the first part of the program here. So, Alexander, you know, this is what we are faced right now, because there's going to be a huge disappointment. And I would even wager to say within the MAGA movement. Go ahead.
Donald Trump is beholden to his donors. And he took $100 million from Miriam Adelson, reportedly in exchange for commitments on supporting an Israeli annexation of the West Bank. $100 million is not something that Trump can just walk away from. He needed it, and he's going to need the support of these people in order to be able to get anything done, whatever he may try to get done in this administration. So we have to understand also the direction of the relationship between the United States and Israel. The United States does not necessarily support Israel. Rather, we should understand the United States is a vassal state of Israel. We saw when Bibi Netanyahu came to Washington, he got a record number of standing ovations. Practically every sentence he said in Congress, it was a standing ovation for longer than the sentence took to say. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was disgusting to see a foreign leader applauded in this way when he's carrying out this genocide in the Middle East, attacking multiple countries. And this is what the United States has been reduced to. It's a vassal state of Israel, and Trump understood that, to his credit, perhaps from a campaigning perspective, and took advantage of it during his campaign. And now we're going to reap the consequences of that during his administration.
You know, Michael, Alexander brings up a good point. I don't think I necessarily agree. I mean, as a vassal of state, it seems to me that the American foreign policy wants continued hegemony, particularly in the Middle East. And Israel is its proxy. And, well, they commit a genocide, but they continue our hegemony. I think it's more like that kind of relationship right there. It's because the Americans want to maintain hegemony and deny countries like Iran influence, they're willing to go along with the most grotesque acts that humans can commit against each other. That's more or less how I look at it. What are your thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on this. There's this big debate as to who controls who. Some camps believe that Israel controls the United States. Others say that the United States is the one that ultimately uses Israel as a proxy. I'm of the mind in which American foreign policy, regardless of Democrat or Republican in the White House, follows the same strategy and the same policies within strategic areas like the Middle East. Within the study of international relations, we have a model called, commitment theory, or commitment problems. It's largely written by the great IR theorist James Fearon. In other words, the United States is committed to propping up, defending certain states and certain policies in regions around the world. Let's just use Israel as a good example of this. Iran is the bad guy, Israel is the good guy. And it doesn't matter what Israel does, Iran does, it is much more prudent for the United States to continue with the same policy than completely reversing tactics, making it look like we are now suddenly abandoning our ally, despite the fact that the ally is now committing grotesque acts of multiple war crimes, not just in the Palestinian territories, but also in southern Lebanon. They are now just openly occupying large areas of southern Syria. If they just simply annex it along with the Golan Heights, I am very doubtful that American foreign policy will condemn this in the same way that they condemn Russia's annexation of territories in Ukraine, simply because of the fact that it makes more sense to continue down the path that you are on than to do a complete 180 and seem like you are now abandoning your allies because of the new administration or just new geopolitical realities.
You know, it's very interesting, Alexander, the calling card of Anthony Blinken during the past disastrous 4 years was the rules-based order. And it was really interesting because the Americans got all their minions in Europe to start mimicking it over and over again as if it had some kind of meaning. But what we have is a rules disorder at the end of this administration. We all agree here that there is continuity. Would an Obama administration or a Bush administration tolerate genocide? We don't know, okay? That's only a hypothetical thing here. But to gloss it over in the rules-based order, I certainly hope that term is forever retired. Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, I think that America has not been taken very seriously by the adults in the room, like Russia, China, and other emerging economies around the world. When the Secretary of State flies around the world and all he produces is a bunch of slogans designed for domestic consumption in America, it's very embarrassing, very embarrassing. But you see that when Blinken was in D.C., he would be simply doing the jobs that Israel would send him. So his job was to run cover for Netanyahu. So he would be
Alexander, I mean, the phrase is he was Israel's lawyer, right?
Right. So he's giving press conferences and explaining that a ceasefire is very close. Netanyahu has agreed to a ceasefire. And that very same day, Netanyahu has already announced that he will not agree to any ceasefire. Obviously, the administration knew that. Obviously, Blinken knew that. And yet they went and said it. So what could this be except for domestic propaganda purposes, or just to confuse people or confuse some observers as to how disconnected they could be? But we know they cannot be this disconnected. They're in regular communication.
Okay, Michael, we have one last minute here. I'm going to be a little provocative with you. I started out the program by claiming that Anthony Blinken wasn't a diplomat. Does that make you, considering his tenure, does that make you miss Henry Kissinger?
No. Okay. Oh, God. Please, no. I'll just leave it at that. No. And
my point is, and I'm obviously being provocative here, Michael, but the going to China, Nixon going to China, things like that. This is what diplomats do. I mean, there's a lot of collateral damage, obviously, but that was thinking strategically about the national interest, even if we disagree with the outcomes. But the point is that, and I think it's already been mentioned here, is that now the Secretary of State is just a cog in the works, and diplomacy has no role in American foreign policy, unfortunately. And I don't think it's going to change. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. I want to thank my guests in Tashkent and here in Moscow. And of course, I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. Remember, cross talk.